whole Manafort trial is very sad.
One of Donald Trump's advisors has a $3 million problem. And if you're doing this Nomad Capitalist stuff wrong, so could you. I recently came across the headline on CNBC that announced that Paul Manafort, a longtime lobbyist in Washington, D.C., who chaired Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, has settled a civil case with the U.S. government for $3.15 million. We told you before that Paul Manafort was in a lot of hot water over undisclosed foreign bank accounts. So I'm going to share the article with you, and I'm going to tell you what you need to know to make sure you don't end up in the same situation. Because as you know, I am the goody two-shoes of the offshore business, and we are not opening offshore bank accounts because we want to hide our money, because we want to stick it to the government. I mean, if you call diversification and taking your money out of their system, sticking it to them, that's then fine. But we're not doing things to obscure where our money is. We're doing offshore banking, offshore investment, offshore brokerage accounts because we want to take control of our money at a time when 3 bank failures in a week, more than some countries have had in their entire history, when the FDIC will decide whose money lives or dies. That's the reason to do it. And you should always be disclosing your accounts, not just for Americans. Other countries sometimes require it too. But CNBC says that Paul Manafort, who ran Donald Trump's 2016 campaign, has indeed agreed to pay $3.15 million with an M to settle a civil case filed by the Department of Justice over undeclared foreign bank accounts. And he was doing some pretty silly stuff with this. First of all, I don't know how he got all of these accounts as an American. Some of the places they've mentioned in various documentaries I've watched, I'm like, yeah, that seems like it's relatively off limits to Americans. So somehow he got these accounts. And then he was basically, they alleged, sending money from, let's say, an account in Cyprus to pay, for whatever it was, $100,000 in suits in Washington, D.C. I suppose if you're buying $100,000 worth of suits, they will take a wire transfer and not the usual, credit card payment. And I guess they don't really care where the money's coming from, but it seemed to me like that's a pretty bold move, that you're sending the money back into the country where you're not disclosing it. Many people who open up these offshore bank accounts don't even know, and sometimes their domestic tax preparer tells them, oh, you don't need to report those, that rule doesn't apply to you. Nomad Capitalist and our network of tax experts who focus on international tax have often had to tell people, you do need to file that. That's why if you're going to be a global citizen, if you're going to be a nomad capitalist, having an international tax expert is so important. Now, the civil case, CNBC said, was filed in April of 2022, and prosecutors alleged that Manafort had failed to disclose more than 20 offshore bank accounts he ordered opened in the UK. I think there are UK accounts, I suppose, that will take Americans for, let's say, $1 million or more. Cyprus has become more difficult, lots of crackdowns there. And St. Vincent and the Grenadines, not as big as it used to be. The government signed an order for Manafort to pay fines, penalties, and interest, alleging he had failed to file federal tax documents detailing the accounts and failed to disclose the money on his income tax returns. Is also on the separate forms, I would imagine, FBAR, which is a separate process. The government said false tax returns were filed from 2006 to 15, and the Treasury Department had notified Manafort of the fines and assessment in July of 2020. And so this goes on to talk about how Manafort had faced criminal charges as part of the special counsel, Robert Mueller's investigation. He was convicted in 2018 of 8 financial crimes and was sentenced to prison, but was pardoned in the final weeks of Trump's presidency. And so all the political stuff I will leave for the political commentators. But this is just the latest in a line of multi-million-dollar fines. If you are a U.S. person, U.S. citizen, U.S. green card holder, or you just somehow spend too much time in the United States, they've got an interesting formula they use to calculate your physical presence in the United States. For tax purposes, you are required to file a report of all of your foreign financial accounts. Could be bank accounts, could be brokerage accounts. There's been times when someone declared, you're holding gold, but it seems like it's kind of a financial account because it's not physical, it's not properly allocated, and so, all right, maybe disclose that. People have disclosed, PayPal accounts. I'm not here to give you tax advice on what should be disclosed, but you can file on a whole bunch of stuff. And there's a certain way that you have to do it. You've got to put the highest balance in the account. They publish, rates if it's in a foreign currency, what's the value for the year. You go back and you put all these bank accounts on there. And it can be involved sometimes because let's say a certain bank, you have multiple currencies, they might give you a different account number for each currency. There are times when you might move money between accounts, and it might look like when you're filing the report, you have a lot more money in foreign banks than you do. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Plenty of people have money in foreign accounts. They file it. They've never been audited. It's not really a huge issue. What is a huge issue is if, number one, you're not aware, or number two, you decide just not to file what you need to file. Multi-million-dollar fines are really not that uncommon because they can go after half the value of the account. They can apply in a certain fine every year. And so the longer it goes on, that's a problem. And so it's so important to know all the rules if you're going to do this global citizenship stuff. There's so many people out there who, again, the domestic tax preparers, they want to make everything sound simple. Or on the other side, they say, no, you can't go offshore. It's not possible. Don't do it. Don't do it. There's plenty of ways to legally diversify your assets overseas. If you want to move overseas and use your bank accounts for living overseas, for running your business overseas, and then lowering your taxes in the process, you can do that. All these things are perfectly fine. So don't listen to the domestic preparers who try and lead you astray, who try and turn you off from doing this, or try and make it sound easier than it has to be. And don't listen to folks who say, I'm your lawyer for Portugal, and then they have no clue what you're supposed to do in the United States. Nomad Capitalist helps people with the entire suite of services. We found experts all around the world who can help people make sure they stay in compliance. And if you're an American, it's especially important. Other countries do require that you report your bank accounts overseas as well. And most countries that have what's called a residential income tax system will say if you earn interest in another country, it will still be taxable where you live. So if you've got a bank account in Singapore, you need to pay tax. And the US is in that same camp as well. If you earn interest, if you have capital gains, if you have income from other countries, that is taxable, subject to any kind of treaties or anything like that. So make sure you have the right people in your corner. I don't want to scare you away from opening bank accounts, but when I see this, I say to myself, I wonder how many people are out there who, again, either don't know or just ignoring the law, thinking they're not going to get caught. People get caught all the time. We've seen penalties much bigger than this. You don't want to be in trouble. The whole point of going offshore is that you're opening up more opportunities for freedom. You're opening up, more freedom personal lifestyle. You're opening up more chances to grow your wealth, to protect your wealth, because you don't want to be stuck in the banks that are failing. You don't want to have, Justin Trudeau decide he doesn't like you and freeze your bank account. You don't want any of that stuff to happen to you. But if you don't, file the proper forms like an FBAR, if you don't report income you make overseas, you're going to have less freedom. So learn from Paul Manafort. Don't pay $3.15 million. File the forms, and if you need help, talk to someone like Nomad Capitalist or a tax professional.